Most people think about aging in terms of wrinkles, gray hair, or maybe stiff joints. But the real silent shift that happens as we get older isn't on the outside, it's in our muscles. And the irony is, muscle isn't just about vanity or looking fit. It's the single most metabolically active tissue in your body. It's where you burn glucose, it's where you store energy, and it's one of the strongest predictors of how well and how long you'll live. Now here's the problem. As we age, our muscles stop responding the way they used to. You can give them the same protein, the same exercise, the same stimulus, and they just don't grow as effectively. This phenomenon is called anabolic resistance, and it's a barrier almost no one is talking about. But it matters because when your muscles stop responding, everything else in your health begins to unravel. Your glucose control, your energy levels, even your ability to stay independent. In today's talk, I want to peel back the layers on why this happens, what it means for your long-term health, and most importantly, what you can do to overcome it. Because if you can fight back against muscle resistance, you're not just slowing aging, you're actively reshaping it. Muscle is not just the tissue that allows us to move, lift, or appear strong. It is the largest and most important reservoir for glucose in the human body. Every time we consume carbohydrates, whether from bread, fruit, or even vegetables, that glucose has to go somewhere. If it lingers in the bloodstream, it becomes toxic, damaging blood vessels, nerves, and organs. The body must quickly decide where to put it. While the liver can store a limited amount and fat cells can absorb it as triglycerides, the true workhorse in glucose regulation is skeletal muscle. This is where the majority of glucose is cleared, especially after a meal, and this process is vital for keeping blood sugar stable and protecting the body from metabolic diseases. As we age, this role of muscle becomes even more critical. The ability of our muscles to soak up glucose effectively is directly tied to how sensitive they are to insulin. Young, healthy muscles respond quickly to insulin, pulling glucose from the blood and storing it as glycogen or burning it for energy. However, when muscle mass declines or when insulin resistance sets in, the system breaks down. Glucose lingers in the blood longer, the pancreas must work harder to pump out insulin, and over time this contributes to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and accelerated aging. In this sense, muscle isn't simply a structure for strength. It is a metabolic organ, the most powerful ally we have against the chronic conditions that creep in with age. The problem arises when people overlook the metabolic role of muscle. Too often, muscle is viewed only through the lens of athletic performance or physical appearance. But consider this, a person with more muscle mass has a greater capacity to clear glucose from every meal, reducing the burden on the pancreas and lowering the chances of insulin resistance developing. Conversely, when muscle mass is lost through inactivity or age-related decline, the system loses its primary sink for glucose. This loss accelerates the march toward metabolic dysfunction, creating a dangerous feedback loop where less muscle leads to more glucose in the blood, and more glucose leads to greater insulin resistance, which in turn further erodes muscle health. This is why maintaining and even building muscle in the aging process is more than just a lifestyle choice. It is a medical necessity. Every rep in the gym, every effort to consume adequate protein, is essentially an investment in glucose control. Resistance training not only stimulates muscle growth, but also enhances insulin sensitivity, making the existing muscle tissue more efficient at absorbing and storing glucose. Even modest gains in muscle strength and mass can significantly reduce post-meal glucose spikes, a benefit that rivals or exceeds many medications prescribed for blood sugar management. In older adults, this connection becomes the dividing line between health and disease, independence and frailty. A person who preserves their muscle mass as they age is more likely to maintain metabolic flexibility, resist chronic disease, and stay active in daily life. On the other hand, someone who allows muscle to deteriorate faces not only physical weakness but also metabolic chaos. What makes this so profound is that unlike genetic predispositions or certain unavoidable aspects of aging, muscle health is largely under our control. The body will respond at any age to the right signals: nutritional support through high-quality protein, and mechanical stress through resistance exercise. When we begin to recognize muscle as the body's primary site of glucose disposal, we stop seeing it as optional or cosmetic. Muscle becomes a metabolic shield, guarding against the ravages of aging by maintaining stable glucose and insulin levels. It is no exaggeration to say that muscle is the strongest metabolic ally in aging, not because it merely supports movement, but because it underpins the very processes that determine whether we age with vitality or with disease. In that light, muscle health should be viewed not as a side note in fitness, but as the central strategy for anyone seeking to extend both lifespan and health span. As we grow older, one of the hidden barriers we face is something called anabolic resistance. This is the frustrating reality that our muscles no longer respond to food and exercise in the same way they once did. In youth, eating a protein-rich meal or lifting weights would send a strong signal to the muscles to grow, repair, and strengthen. But with age, that signal gets weaker. The same workout, the same steak, the same amino acids that once triggered growth now produce a muted response. This blunting of muscle growth is at the core of why so many older adults struggle to maintain their strength and vitality, even when they are making the effort to eat right and stay active. Anabolic resistance doesn't mean that building muscle in older age is impossible. It means the threshold for stimulation is higher. The muscle tissue has essentially become stubborn, requiring a stronger or more targeted signal to activate growth pathways. For example, where a younger person might grow muscle with a moderate resistance workout, an older adult may need higher intensity, more resistance, or greater protein intake to achieve the same effect. It is not that the tools no longer work, but rather that the body has become less sensitive to them. Understanding this concept is critical because without addressing it, even well-intentioned efforts at nutrition and exercise may feel disappointing or ineffective. The reasons for anabolic resistance are layered and complex. At the cellular level, muscle protein synthesis slows down because the signaling pathways that govern growth, like mTOR, are less responsive. Blood flow to muscle tissue also declines with age, which means fewer nutrients are delivered right where they are needed after a meal or workout. Hormonal changes play their part too. Declines in testosterone, estrogen, and growth hormone all reduce the anabolic drive that once kept muscles primed for growth. Inflammation and insulin resistance, common companions of aging, further interfere with the muscle's ability to respond to anabolic signals. Together, these factors create a perfect storm where muscles essentially ignore the cues that should help them stay strong. The consequences of anabolic resistance reach far beyond physical appearance. When muscles fail to grow or even maintain themselves, strength declines and independence is threatened. Everyday activities like climbing stairs, carrying groceries, or even rising from a chair become more difficult. But perhaps more concerning is the metabolic impact. Since muscle is the largest site of glucose disposal, a decline in muscle mass due to anabolic resistance worsens glucose control, pushing the body closer toward insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. This is why anabolic resistance isn't simply a problem for athletes or the fitness conscious. It is a medical and metabolic issue that affects long-term health and quality of life. The good news is that anabolic resistance, while challenging, is not insurmountable. The key is to recognize that the muscle needs a stronger signal to respond. Research shows that older adults benefit from higher doses of protein per meal, particularly from sources rich in the amino acid leucine, which is especially powerful at stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Similarly, resistance training must be more deliberate and consistent, focusing on progressive overload and muscle engagement rather than casual activity. Even short, intense sessions can make a difference, as they provide the kind of mechanical stress muscles need to overcome their resistance. It is also worth noting that anabolic resistance is not an excuse to give up. It is a call to action. The body may not respond as easily as it once did, but it does respond. Many studies have shown that older adults, even those well into their 70s and 80s, can build muscle mass and strength when provided with the right nutritional and exercise interventions. This fact alone is empowering because it proves that age does not have to equal inevitable decline. Instead, it highlights the importance of being intentional with lifestyle choices as we grow older. Anabolic resistance is the barrier no one talks about, yet it is central to the challenge of healthy aging. By understanding that aging muscles are harder to stimulate, we can adjust our strategies, eating enough protein, emphasizing resistance training, and creating the conditions for growth. In doing so, we can bypass this barrier and preserve the muscle that protects not just our strength, but our metabolism, our independence, and ultimately, our longevity. Muscle loss with aging is more than just a matter of shrinking strength or appearance. It is a powerful driver of insulin resistance, frailty, and chronic disease risk. Muscle is the body's most metabolically active tissue and the primary site where glucose is cleared from the blood. When muscle mass is lost, the capacity to store and burn glucose drops dramatically, leaving excess sugar to circulate in the bloodstream. Over time, this persistent elevation in blood glucose forces the pancreas to pump out more insulin in an attempt to manage the load. The result is the gradual development of insulin resistance, the very foundation of type 2 diabetes and many other metabolic disorders. What begins as a subtle loss of muscle mass soon cascades into a storm of metabolic dysfunction. The metabolic consequences of muscle loss do not stop with insulin resistance. Chronic high insulin levels promote fat storage, particularly around the abdomen, which only worsens the problem. Fat tissue, especially visceral fat, is inflammatory in nature, releasing cytokines that interfere with insulin signaling even more. At the same time, muscle loss reduces the body's ability to dispose of glucose after meals, creating sharp spikes in blood sugar that damage blood vessels, nerves, and organs. It is no surprise that individuals with lower muscle mass are more prone to developing type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even certain cancers. Muscle then acts like a shield. As long as it is preserved, the body has a powerful buffer against metabolic chaos. When it is lost, the shield breaks, and disease finds its way in. Frailty is another outcome of muscle loss, and it represents one of the most feared consequences of aging. Frailty is not simply being weak. It is a condition where the body becomes highly vulnerable to stress. A simple fall, an infection, or even a few days of bed rest can set off a spiral that an older body cannot recover from. Muscle mass is at the core of resilience, allowing people to stand, walk, climb, and carry out the activities of daily life. Without sufficient muscle, independence is lost, and the risks of falls, fractures, and disability increase dramatically. This is why frailty is often described as the tipping point between healthy aging and decline. It is not just about surviving, but about how well one lives in the later decades of life. The connection between muscle loss and chronic disease is also deeply tied to inflammation. When muscle declines, fat often takes its place. Unlike muscle, fat tissue is metabolically harmful, secreting inflammatory compounds that spread throughout the body. This low-grade chronic inflammation is a hallmark of aging, often called inflammaging, and it accelerates nearly every chronic disease process, from heart disease to dementia. Muscle loss, therefore, does not just weaken the body, it feeds a systemic process that undermines long-term health. Yet, the story is not entirely grim. The relationship between muscle, insulin sensitivity, and disease risk is dynamic, which means it can be influenced by lifestyle. Studies consistently show that individuals with more muscle mass have lower rates of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, even when controlling for body fat. Resistance training, in particular, is one of the most effective ways to improve insulin sensitivity and fight back against frailty. By stimulating muscle growth and strength, resistance exercise restores the body's capacity to clear glucose, lowers inflammation, and strengthens the resilience needed to withstand the stresses of aging. Nutrition, too, plays a crucial role. Adequate protein intake ensures that the raw materials for maintaining and building muscle are always available. The lesson is clear: muscle is not just about strength or vanity. It is a powerful determinant of metabolic health, independence, and resilience. When muscle is lost, insulin resistance accelerates, frailty takes hold, and the risk of chronic disease multiplies. But when muscle is preserved and cultivated, the opposite is true. The body stays metabolically flexible, strong, and resistant to the diseases of aging. Protecting muscle is, in essence, protecting the future. It is one of the few interventions that can simultaneously guard against insulin resistance, prevent frailty, and reduce chronic disease risk, all while supporting a higher quality of life in the years that matter most. Resistance training and optimal protein intake stand as the two most effective antidotes to anabolic resistance, the condition where aging muscles become less responsive to growth signals. While it may seem discouraging that older muscles require a stronger push to adapt, the truth is that the body retains its ability to build and repair muscle throughout life. The key lies in delivering the right kind of stimulus and fuel. Resistance training provides the mechanical stress that signals muscles to grow, while high-quality protein provides the building blocks that make that growth possible. Together, They form a powerful combination that directly counters the muted response of anabolic resistance. Resistance training is unique in the way it communicates with muscle. Unlike aerobic activity, which primarily strengthens the heart and lungs, resistance exercise targets the fibers themselves, causing micro tears that prompt repair and growth. This mechanical stress is precisely what aging muscles need to overcome their reluctance to respond. When weights, bands, or even bodyweight movements are applied consistently and progressively, the muscles adapt by becoming stronger, thicker, and more metabolically active. Importantly, resistance training does not just preserve muscle, it improves the muscle's sensitivity to nutrients and hormones, making each subsequent meal of protein more effective at stimulating growth. For older adults, this means that lifting weights does more than build strength. It restores the very pathways that aging has dulled. Protein, on the other hand, provides the raw material for this process. Without sufficient protein, the body simply cannot build or maintain muscle, regardless of the training performed. For younger individuals, a modest amount of protein may suffice to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But for older adults facing anabolic resistance, the threshold is higher. They require more protein per meal to trigger the same anabolic effect. Research has shown that leucine, an essential amino acid found in abundance in animal proteins such as meat, eggs, and dairy, is particularly effective in activating the growth pathways in muscle. Plant proteins, while beneficial, often require larger quantities or careful combinations to match this effect. The lesson is clear. Quality and quantity both matter when it comes to protein intake in older age. The synergy between resistance training and protein is what makes them so effective. When resistance exercise primes the muscle, the cells become more sensitive to amino acids, and the consumed protein is put to work with greater efficiency. This partnership ensures that the anabolic response is maximized even in the face of age-related resistance. For this reason, a strategy that combines regular resistance workouts with adequate, high-quality protein at each meal is far more powerful than either intervention alone. It is a 1-2 punch against the decline that aging seeks to impose. Beyond simply building muscle, this combination produces ripple effects across health. Greater muscle mass improves glucose regulation, lowers the risk of type 2 diabetes, and reduces systemic inflammation. Strength gains protect against frailty and falls, while the metabolic benefits translate into lower risks of heart disease, dementia, and other chronic conditions. In many ways, resistance training and protein are not merely antidotes to anabolic resistance. They are foundational pillars of healthy aging itself. It is important to recognize that the barrier of anabolic resistance is not a wall, but a hurdle. It may take more effort, more protein, and more deliberate training, but the body will respond. Countless studies and real-world examples demonstrate that older adults, even those in their 70s and 80s, can increase muscle size and strength when they consistently apply these strategies. The message is profoundly hopeful. Aging does not erase the potential for growth. It simply demands a more intentional approach. Resistance training and optimal protein intake should therefore be viewed as non-negotiables in the pursuit of longevity. They are not optional add-ons for the fitness-minded, but essential tools for anyone who wishes to age with strength, independence, and vitality. Together, they fight back against the silent barrier of anabolic resistance, restoring the body's ability to build and maintain the muscle that protects health on every level. Preserving muscle as we age is often misunderstood. Too many people dismiss it as an exercise in vanity, as though caring about muscle is only about aesthetics or showing off strength. But the truth is much deeper and far more consequential. Maintaining muscle is not about sculpting a body for the mirror. It is about safeguarding independence, protecting health, and extending life. Muscle is the tissue that allows us to move through the world, to lift, to carry, to climb, and to stand tall. Beyond that, it is the most metabolically protective organ we have, influencing everything from glucose control to inflammation. When we preserve muscle, we are not chasing vanity. We are building the foundation of longevity. Independence is one of the most cherished aspects of life, especially in older age. The ability to walk unaided, to rise from a chair, to climb stairs, or to carry groceries determines whether someone can live freely or whether they must rely on others for basic needs. Muscle strength is at the center of these abilities. Without it, even simple daily tasks become daunting, and the risk of falls, fractures, and disability rises dramatically. Frailty sets in not because of wrinkles or gray hair, but because of the silent loss of muscle mass and strength. Preserving muscle, therefore, is a direct investment in independence, ensuring that we can remain active and self-sufficient for as long as possible. From a metabolic standpoint, muscle preservation is equally vital. Muscle tissue is the largest site of glucose disposal in the body. It acts as a sponge after every meal, soaking up sugar from the blood and protecting against dangerous spikes in blood glucose and insulin. When muscle mass declines, this buffer shrinks, and the body is left vulnerable to insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and the cascade of diseases that follow. Preserving muscle means preserving metabolic stability. It means lowering the risk of heart disease, dementia, and other chronic conditions that erode both lifespan and quality of life. In this way, muscle is not a superficial asset. It is a metabolic shield against the diseases of aging. There is also an often overlooked psychological dimension to maintaining muscle. Strength provides confidence. It reassures us that our bodies are capable and resilient, that we can handle the demands of life. Older adults who preserve their muscle often report greater energy, better mood, and more willingness to engage with the world. This sense of capability is not trivial. It translates into higher levels of social activity, more movement, and ultimately, better overall health. The cycle is self-reinforcing. Strength leads to confidence, confidence leads to activity, and activity further preserves strength. Preserving muscle does not require extreme or complicated interventions. It is built on simple, powerful habits, resistance training performed regularly, adequate intake of protein with each meal, and a lifestyle that values movement rather than prolonged sitting. These are not exotic solutions but practical, accessible strategies that anyone can adopt. The difference lies in consistency. Just as muscle is lost gradually, it is preserved and rebuilt gradually through steady, repeated effort that compounds over time. The narrative around muscle must change. It should not be dismissed as vanity or associated only with youth. Instead, muscle should be recognized for what it truly is, the most reliable predictor of independence in aging and one of the strongest levers we have to influence longevity. A person with preserved muscle enters older age with resilience, both physically and metabolically. A person who lets muscle wither faces frailty, dependence, and higher risk of disease. The contrast could not be more stark, nor the choice more clear. To preserve muscle is to preserve life itself, not just the number of years we live, but the quality of those years. It is the difference between merely surviving and thriving, between living in dependence and living with freedom. Preserving muscle is not vanity, it is wisdom, it is preparation, and above all, it is the foundation of a strong, independent, and enduring life.